the most exciting thing is we now have a calendar page on the Law Bible. So we haven't linked that to the Law Bible just yet. We've not linked it anywhere, but it's here, and I have got the link. I can put it on in chat if anyone's interested. I want you guys to be able to see this properly though, and I see that it's sort of cut off a bit. So what I'm gonna do is move this across. No, not that. So that it's not chopped off. Yeah, that's about right and doesn't chop any major bits off. But of course, eventually I'm going to link this up at some point so that you can see it yourselves properly. There's a little paragraph, a little starting point of what the calendar's about and what we measure time by, what the months are measured by, which we talked about in the first Worldbuilding stream the other week. We sort of set that in stone and came up with the month names, and I've even put a bit of custom colours on here, which I'm really like. My geeky self is proud of that, because by default you can't do that on World Anvil. So I had to go add some custom CSS for that, and each colour symbolises the month and the colour of what the sun, the light it emits that time of year. So it's sort of the months are very much like the seasons and represent the seasons. We still haven't thought of the days of the week yet, but there's no rush for that. We're gonna wait and see what comes to us and what feels right as we build this world. And we're going to add to this calendar today. I've put some little just examples of boxes. A holiday will go here. It doesn't have to exactly be that day, of course, but I'll just plop to that there for testing purposes to see how the colours look and the aesthetic of it all. But we are going to add some to this today, and so we're sort of going to be setting it in stone, I guess, but not like 100%. Like, say if we end up coming up with some story things and backstories, and there's a few little clashes, and we're like, oh no, that holiday can't go there because it needs to happen at this point in time, then we're always welcome to switch things around if it works better for our story to have it, to change it up a bit. But it's going to just be fun to sort of start filling it out, even if it's not 100%. Doesn't have to 100% be exactly like that by the end. And what's cool about this is, like, you know, I don't know at this point in time how prominent this calendar and time and months and that is going to be in the game just yet, but even if it's just a background detail, I think it really can help make the world feel much richer and like a real world, and the characters, the NPCs, will have things to talk about, like things that they've recently done or things that they're going to be doing, and just makes them feel like real people a bit more. And that's why Worldbuilding's fun. Some of it might not even be like really massively part of the story or the game in general. Who knows? It could be, if there's like something really awesome and ideal to have as a story point, a plot point in the game. But you know, a big percentage of world building doesn't actually become like huge, but it's just still so fun to do, and I find it super relaxing. Hi Van, how are you doing today? It's so good to see you. How are things for you? I hope work's been nice to you, Van. I hope the clocks are being alright for you guys as well, because it's messed up. I'm sure it's messed up with your sleeping schedules. And yeah, I don't think they're changing for us until the very end of the month, so I think we've still got a couple of weeks of these messed up times. And it's probably very weird because I'm streaming much later for some of you than usual, so it is a bit of an adjustment and it messes us streamers up a little bit, that's for sure. Alright, so what we're going to do first, I mean, we do have our polls list, which hopefully peeps will still vote on throughout the stream. I've noticed we've had a few more votes since last time, which is fabulous. But before we before we look at those festivals and like consider which ones are going to go on the calendar and stuff, I actually wanted to note down important dates that we've already set in stone, that have already become part of the game, that we know already. So we'll get those in first, and then we can shape potential holidays around those important dates, because there's several important dates that we already know have happened, and we can't forget those. They have to go on, and we might, while doing this, decide what the current year will be when Roots and Rumours begins, when the hero meets Carol, that what day and what year that's going to be on this current calendar, because there's going to be a few things to weigh up and consider. But I think it's going to be good to get a year set. I think that will be cool, a point in time. And then it's going to be easier to think of like histories and how many generations there has been since year 0 happened, and it's going to just be a lot easier when it comes to next week's streams and we think of historical figures and years gone by, because that's what's coming up next. We're going to be thinking of important people. That's going to include people of eras gone by, like old gods, old rulers, and also people that are important in the present day or sort of close to the present day but just passed away, like the generation before. Like, so we're gonna sort of look at our periods in time and consider people and things like that. So I think it's going to be especially important today to set some dates in stone and start to see get a timeline forming. But I'd like to definitely add festivals like on here after we've done that, even though the festival dates, like I say, we might have, if there ever comes a point where we have to switch some of them around for plot reasons, so be it. But we'll just sort of see as they'll be there for now, unless it's necessary to switch. So, timeline. We have this as a timeline, folks. Now, this is the important important thing that we need to get on first of all. But then there's years that are quite a bit before that will have to be placed on the calendar too. But we'll start with what we know first. Or actually, we might not. We might actually start with some of the further bits in history and starts adding those to the calendar. But so maybe I'll just get a quick rough Google Doc up first to plan this before we place them on our special calendar. We'll get a rough draft done first. So I think what we can do here, perhaps we should make a new page here for that. Insert page break. Alright, so we're sort of going to write a rough timeline. This timeline that we've got here is literally just dedicated to Carol's life and the life of the Barrels, like how their life is so far. But we're going to do a general timeline now, a rough one. It doesn't have to be anything detailed at this point, but we're going to just plot down the key points in time. So there's obviously going to be an earlier significant ones. We're going to start somewhere in the middle first. I'm going to just plot down a few important events. So there was a point in time. Let's get a certain section up just so we can remind ourselves what we got. So we got the spell. Obviously the spell is going to be one of them, but let's start a little bit before the spell, shall we? Okay, so we have this point in time. So I'm going to word it as the government creates the currency of raindrops. The question mark stands for a year that we haven't set in stone yet, but like I said, we might start actually considering the years now. I think it'd be smart too, because it's going to be easier to start planning history and the history once we know what they are. But before the government created the currency of raindrops, let's give this a heading. Let's call it timeline. Just so folks coming in actually understand what we're actually doing here. Obviously we've got a ton of events that happened before this, so we'll just plot them in first. There's going to be others to fill in, and there's going to be others to fill in after this. We're sort of starting in the middle here to some of the more significant things we've already set in stone. Right, so obviously just before the government create the actual currency, someone has to discover them. We'll say the government scientist discovers X in raindrops. And that would have happened just a slightly bit before they obviously create the currency. Because once they've discovered X, they know that these raindrops are going to be pretty ideal for them to get a bit of power and sort of take control of things, just as governments do. And hi Zex, you're going to probably be lurking today. I hope you've been chatting on Fleet today. Thank you for that. I super appreciate the lurk, Zex, even if you're not actively chatting. That goes for anyone here, because it's a dodgy time of year, March, because the clock's changing, so it kind of messes up times for all of us streamers in a way. So I appreciate it. Alright, and I'm doing okay, lurking and working. Awesome, Van, that's awesome too. I appreciate the lurk. And just so you know, folks, those of you lurking and coming in, if you're curious what we're actually doing, I'm forming a timeline of the world. We already, as some of you might know, those of you that actively keep up with the game as we do it, you'll probably know we've already done an actual timeline of Carol's life. Since the spell of the Everbloom Forest, but we haven't done a timeline of the world as a whole, like the actual key events of the world. So we're just forming a very rough one at the moment. I've already plotted the government creates the currency here. We've got things that are going to happen before that and things that are going to happen after that. And it's just going to be rough at the moment. There's probably going to be way more key things that happen in between, but we're just plotting the ones that we already know of and have set in stone so far together at this point in time. And what I think would be really cool to do is sort of get an idea of a year, set an actual present day year in mind for Roots and Rumours once we've sort of weighed everything up and what seems realistic for the year to be. Because reason why we're doing this now is because we actually have a calendar right here, everyone. It's so cool to see our calendar, and we can add events. We can really customize it and add all our events on these calendars, and there's 30 days in each month, and the months are very heavily inspired by the colours of the seasons. Green is spring, gold is summer, rose is autumn, and blue is winter. And our calendar starts in March, because New Green is equivalent to March, and we've got the Gregorian comparison here for how it looks. So I want to fill this calendar up today. That's the ultimate goal of the stream. And I think the first things we have to do before we start plotting any holidays or festivals on here is to put in the main periods and important dates in time, because otherwise we could end up saying, oh, we'll have the founding festival be this day in late fall, and then we're like, but hang on, we can't because Carol's birthday is there. They could get messed up. So we'll do the ones we already know first, and then we'll sort of get an idea then where to place certain festivals, because we already know that Carol's parents died during the founding festival of Lightfall. So it has to happen when that happened, if that makes sense. So we will be adding Carol when Carol was born, and when Oliver was born, when Carol lost a family, when Carol meets the hero, will go at the bottom of the timeline. So obviously let's add that here, because that's the most recent thing, that in point in time. So let's fill this in. So we'll focus on this area first. So obviously before this, the government was formed at one point in time, but before the government was formed, we have the rise of modern men. And I suppose like once that happens, it's not too long until a government forms, because any society wants structure and order, and that'll happen. And then a little bit after that, as they want to get more powerful, they'll discover naturally there's the X in raindrops, then they'll create the currency, and then everything just blows up after that basically. So we'll start filling more in as well. And if raindrops are a global currency, you could use something like RC, raindrop consolidation, to denote modern history, sort of like how we use CE, common era in real life, or AD for a less secular calendar in real life. Awesome. Yeah, feel free to drop your suggestions, folks, because obviously all the eras and periods of time, there's going to be a few. Obviously we've got the modern area, which the sun calendar is based on, and this is from year 0 onwards. Year 0 was when the stars stopped changing, basically, as Hank quotes in the flashback. The stars in the sky used to change very regularly. They are the legends of old, the gods, rulers of the world. They regularly would sort of they were always, what's the word? I can't think of the actual word. I've got brain melt. But yes, that they measured the stars in history. In a period gone by, stars used to be measured. The calendar used to be measured by the stars, but then it changed, because once the stars stopped changing, they couldn't do that anymore, and so they measure it this way now. And it's a pretty big thing, the stars stopping, and because the stars are such a big deal to the people of this world. They are the gods and the people that they worship at the end of the day. So it's weird, and it's a change. So that needs to go in as well. We got to figure out where the point when the stars stop changing and when year 0 begins. I'd say it's going to come here. The stars in the sky stop changing. Well, we'll just put the stars stop changing. We don't have to put in the sky. No more stars. Well, we can always expand on that on a separate article. Keep this a brief thing for now. Year 0 begins. 0 on the modern calendar, current calendar, begins. So that's when the years start counting from now. So really, whatever the day is when Cal meets the hero is however many years after this event, when the stars stop changing. So before then, obviously, the time when things were measured by another calendar, the stars, modern man still did exist, and the government were definitely still around. So I imagine there's been a few generations at least of that. Perhaps, I guess that's another thing to weigh up, how many years this would consist of. And we won't, when we say it, the years, it'll just be approximate at this point in time, because we could always realise something and have to change it. but it's good to still have an approximate thing in mind. So I'm trying to think how many years are gonna, because these ones would probably happen quite quickly. I'd say once the government was formed, they latched on to the idea of Xing raindrops pretty quickly, and created that currency of raindrops pretty quickly, perhaps. And I'm imagining that the government was formed not long after the rise of modern men as well, because it's usually not long until society wants some structure and order. I guess the main thing is the gap between these two. Because the creation of this currency would have been a very significant change to the society as a whole, but this was also a very important, drastic change to society as a whole. But I don't imagine a long time might have passed. I'm going to put that for now between 10 and 50 as a sort of idea, but that, like I say, that's just approximate. If we think it needs to be a little bit longer, then fair enough. But these point in times, I'd say, happened relatively close, perhaps. So, and I'd say there was another stretch of time that passed here. In fact, it might be easier to sort of do it with dashes instead. Hello, hi Sangi, how you doing? It's so good to see you. I hope you're well. And Van says, does this reference back on what is on our sheet? It does, Van. It's all sort of, I'm going to do like a very much briefer guide of that in a way. So I think it's for the purpose of getting a year set. These question marks can be filled in with a year, because it's really difficult at the moment to sort of I've no idea whether it's going to be 2000 AD or 200 AD at this point in time. So it's once we sort of get an idea of how many years have passed since the stars stopped changing, it's going to be easier to shape the history and which rulers have lived over the generations and years. Because obviously if 1,000+ years have passed, there's going to be way more history, way more rulers, way more government that have existed over the years. But we don't know, the government might be relatively new, it might be a couple of 100 years old, not a few thousand years old. And that means if it's only a couple of 100 years old or even less than that, then there's less significant figures for us to sort of shape as well. So our job would be a lot easier perhaps, because we've got less history to shape. And I'd say before the rise of modern men, I'd say there's less known. It's probably a mystery to people what things were like back then, but it was definitely like the age of stars and when the gods lived, and those gods that we're going to write about next week and sort together will be the people that would have lived before the rise of modern men. I would say about 100 years. Yeah, so I definitely am more on with you on that I'd say definitely in the hundreds rather than the thousands, because it's quite overwhelming to think we'd have to plan a history of thousands of years. That would be like absolutely generations upon generations of ancestors. So it's a little less overwhelming if say we've got year 0 here, so obviously let's put that in as 0, and Carol meets the hero here. Now if we say something like that, 124, I'm thinking like of the equivalent of our calendar here, like it's 2020 here, right? Well, 2021, sorry. And in the 1900s, I suppose, civilizations died to drastically sort of change at that point. So I could imagine a lot could happen in 124 years, because it has in our world since 1900. So maybe something like that, because we don't want to start exactly on a year 100. It would seem a little bit unnatural, so we'll put a little bit more of a odd number there. Something like that. That is just as an approximate idea for now, but we'll see. We'll have to fill in these and see if it's workable. But I don't think there's any major events that have happened since the stars stopped changing. I think the only major event is when the spell happened. So we have the spell of Everbloom Forest in our lore Bible here, folks. If anyone wants to have a nosy at our lore, feel free to, and then you can get geeky with us. So the spell of Everbloom Forest happens. I'd say that's the most significant event that happens after the stars stop changing. There's not really anything else that we've really placed on our calendar that's happened at this point between now and then. Obviously, eventually we will have lots of little things that have happened between now and then, but the major things is that. So we've already got that timeline here, and we know that this happened 15 months ago, right? And so obviously that was only probably the year before. Oops, wrong one. And now this is where we're gonna obviously have to plot in the months, because we're getting 15 months ago, 12 months ago, 9 months ago, 6 months ago, 3 months ago, 1 month ago, and episode 1 begins. So all this life of Carol and her family has spanned the last 15 months. And we're going to start plotting down on our calendar when these things happened. So if the present time is 124, I like that number. I'm totally not biased because my birthday is on the 24th day of a month. I just like the number 24, it's tidy. So I'm thinking, Carol meets the hero in the year 124, like Van says, 100 years. I'm with Van on that, so we'll say 124 is the calendar. That means how many generations between that and year 0? Then, if that's the case, there's not been that many. It's definitely less overwhelming than if we said I added another 1,000 years onto that. Get geeky with us. Yes, being geeky is fun. Are there any dark ages, something like the Bronze Age collapse? Would the stars stopping lead to something like that, or was it more benign? Well, the interesting thing about the stars changing is that the cultures and people of the world will have their own myths and beliefs for why it happened. Just as how things are in our world and how religions form and different belief systems, I imagine something similar could happen like that here. And obviously there's going to be a truth, the real reason why the stars stop changing, though but people living in the world don't know that. They're just making up their own little tales. There's probably absolutely dozens different cultures and factions have for why the stars stopped, and that's going to be quite fascinating to plan. So obviously you guys could always suggest things and it would get added to the misbelief section, and that different people could have thought up for why that happened. So and as for the other part of questions like Dark Ages and Bronze Age, I imagine that they would fall under the question mark section, before the rise of modern men, unless it was around the modern rise of men. There could have easily have been a couple of periods of time before the government formed where life was a lot more cavemen, like a lot more cavemen life. So we could always fill in something like that here. If anyone has any ideas for what could go those question marks, feel free to say. I mean, modern men, I guess it depends how we want to define that, because modern men could also mean like civilized peoples, like peoples that are sort of educated enough to form a government, which means that would have to fall more here if we do define modern men by that. So I don't know if we could call cavemen modern men. I guess it depends on how we see it, really. And it's definitely a lot more vague up here and mysterious, but I see it as a bunch of eras and stars, and Van had a few ideas for that a while back as well, and eventually we might talk more about that together as well. And to be honest, we probably will a bit next week, because we're going to talk about gods together. And so we're going to have some thoughts and do a bit of brainstorming on what those people could have been like, and they would have obviously formed the legends of all the gods of today that the people worship, and things like that. But then obviously it's not as vital at this point in time to flesh that out when we sort of more focused on what's happening here right now, because that's relevant to the game and the present day. But it's still fun to still consider that, because things like that could become important and help build sort of cultures and things as well, build the richness of the world. Hi Kay, how are you doing? It's so good to see you. Hope you're doing well. How are things on your end? How is your crafting going and your sewing? Depends how long men live in this world. Yeah, probably I'd say it's similar to planet Earth people's age spans. Definitely the humans anyway. If I'm thinking the human race of this world would probably have like an age span of 70, 80 years now, just to keep it easier and more relatable to planet Earth. But as for elves and the beast races, maybe their lifespans are a little different. So that's something to consider as well. Are the birth dates of characters based on community members going to be based on our real life birthdays converted into character? That's up to you, Chubb. Like, your character could have your real birthday if you want, but it could also have a fictional birthday. It's honestly just whatever we want and whatever's best. So yeah, it's fun to do that. My birthday, my actual birthday, would fall on the 24th of New Gold, if I was going by my real birthday, because New Gold is the equivalent of June. Alright, so where were we? Here we are. So we've got in some, and let's just to make it make sense how much time has passed here. Why am I doing that one? Let's do this instead. It looks a lot tidier than the arrows. So I'm gonna just say a lot of time passes, because we don't exactly know yet how many years, how many centuries have passed, because this was a very long time ago, before modern man can remember. So I imagine there was a lot of time that passed between some of these ages. But then modern man comes about and things start happening a little bit faster, just like on our planet. Like, as soon as modern men came to exist, everything just kicked off. And government gets formed and just hell breaks loose, basically. So Let's catch up with chat before we fill in a few more important dates on the list as well. And it depends how you figure generations are spread out. Yeah, in terms of like things like that, I'd probably try and keep it close to how things are on Earth, just because it could be a little bit, it could throw people who are getting into the game and the lore if they find out that the average human has a lifespan of like double or 3 times the amount. I think someone like elves or fairies could live a bit longer if we wanted them to, because they're a little bit more mystical and intriguing, so I could imagine they could have a longer lifespan. But I think keeping humans as close to us humans would probably be cool. But the chance to be a little bit more creative with the other races is definitely, I'm all for that if we want to make elves live a bit longer. Alright. And the real reason is a moving black hole slowly consuming everything as it approaches the prey. It's a joke. Well, even the jokes, like I said, even if it's a joke, it's going to get put on the list. I think we did have somewhere. Where is it? Gosh, look at all our festivals here. And just so you know, folks, we have got poll in the poll channel where you can vote for your favourite quirky festival holiday ideas. So feel free to give a heart reaction to any you like the sound of, because these will get added to our calendar too, in between all the important dates, just to flesh out our world even more. And we're going to match different holidays to different races and species, because certain ones are more likely to probably celebrate it than others, different regions of the world, etc. So that's something to consider too. And where were we? So yes, we have Wendage Year Zero, and we've got here, maybe factions, cultures and religions have their own beliefs for why the stars stop changing, some ideas. So I've already started a bullet point list here. It'll just is probably all a bunch of propaganda, and it's just a chance to get creative and wacky and wild as well. And then when they finally do find out the truth, everyone would just be gobsmacked, because it's nothing like how they imagined, probably. So of course we could have absolutely dozens of ideas. We've already got some, and it just puts a lot of, I like doing that because it puts a lot of focus on this whole stars changing and year zero aspect of the story, and it makes it into a key thing, a key event, and it becomes memorable in the mind of the audiences. And I feel like it's going to be a big part of the plot potentially, so it's not something we just want to put on the back burner and then it doesn't become significant in the long run, because it definitely should be and will be. Where's our timeline once again? So many pages now. I'm good, honey. I'm doing good, Kay. I'm getting really nerdy about world building, and I always get super excited about that. It's my favourite thing. Mine would be the 7th of Old Green. Yeah, that sounds like it sounds really. I don't know about you, what you think, guys, but I think that these dates sound really enchanting and very fantasy-like. They definitely sound better than our Gregorian months, that's for sure. But I'm biased. They're nice, they're simple and memorable as well. Like, you can easily realise that it's a month and quickly realise what time of the year the equivalent of planet Earth is with it, because green is clearly spring. And I've got some green colour palettes here. It's like a rainbow, how it changes, by the way. So the golds and the old green slowly changes into new gold, because lime green and gold are close in colour on the colour wheel. The old gold goes into a sort of red, a nice vivid red, and then it slowly becomes a little bit purple in late autumn, because it's got it to become blue for the winter seasons. And I think I settled on the name Rose for the autumn months because it's versatile, and it's simple. It's a 4-letter, 1-syllable word, just like the others. So although green isn't 4 letters, but it's still very simple. And also Rose is my name, and we don't have a character called Rose anymore because she's been renamed to Violet, so it kind of works. So back to our, oh my goodness, where are we? Because we got so many pages. Here we are. I would say that some of that is super ancient. Yes, so eventually, I mean, Van, if you've got any thoughts on what year, how many like millenniums have passed, feel free to say, and I'll add it in the question marks. I know you probably do have the idea more than even me, because you were the one that came up with the concept of the ages. So feel free to give us a year in mind. Alright, so another important date that needs to be added here is probably here, I'd say. If you've read our calendar, then you'll have probably read this. So in the world of Raindrop Chronicles, people don't measure months by the moon like they do on planet Earth. This is because the moon doesn't orbit the planet. It hides behind the planet all times away from the sun, and it has been that way for a very long time. So that law was formed quite a while ago when we came up with the stories and myths and tales for the sun and the moon, that were the stories that the barrels were telling each other. And this was definitely something that we latched on to with this rivalry of the moon and sun, and it's very intriguing. So this particular line here, it hides behind the planet all times away from the sun, and it has been that way for a very long time. So it hasn't been that way forever, but it has been that way for a long time. So that has happened. We'll just call it the Earth for now. Eventually our world will have its own unique fictional name. So at this point in time, Earth is a good general term, because any like sort of water planet could technically be an Earth anyway. So there we go. I think Van, you felt I think, because I did read the timeline, that rough Google sheet that you sent over, and it had it here, I believe, just before the rise of modern men. So there we go. But obviously a lot of time has probably passed between then and this. There we go. I'd say once like all this era here is when things start to become a little bit faded for the modern men, and they just have to rely on their sort of history books and fossils, I guess. So there's different eras. Oh my goodness, thank you so much for the raid, everybody. I appreciate that. RPG Dinosaur Bob, let's give a shout out for that raid. How are you guys doing? Thanks so much for stopping by. I appreciate it, folks. Hi, In Light and Moonflower and RPG Dinosaur Bob as well. How was your stream? You were doing writers. Is writers an actual official new category now, or is it a Twitch game? I'm very curious as someone who streams writing myself, because that's really cool, and it's always good to meet fellow writers. And we are making a nerdy timeline. We're doing lots of nerdy world building at the moment, so that all the awesome details can go into our World Anvil Lore Bible. So it's super fun to chat about this on stream, and feel free to have a peek of our Lore Bible if you'd like, folks. And if you want to learn more about the lore of our game, it's for an RPG, 2D RPG game that is currently in early development. That's what it's for, this lore. And hi Bob, how are you doing? It's good to see you. I bought people. Awesome, it was you. Thank you so much for recommending my stream. I appreciate the love, Bob. And how are you as well? How is everyone? How's everyone going? Welcome, people. Hi, stream was good. Not sure if Writers is some unknown game, but it's a great Twitch category. I'm gonna have a nosy later because I stream in science and technology, which is really cool when I'm for game dev, because I suppose it's the only thing relevant to game dev. But some of my streams can be very non-game dev like this one is more about writing and world building than actually doing the game, and even though it's still for a game, it would be nice to have more choice and category directories on Twitch for peeps like us, for us creative folk. Ideally I like a general game dev channel and a creative writing channel. I think those two would be perfect, and I'd be in both. Yes, the moon's orbit changes during the rise of modern man, and it is before the government comes to power. Awesome. So yeah, just before then, I'd say we'll word it like that. The age of stars begins. Because otherwise it's confusing, but if we say it begins, then we know that this sort of happened during the age of stars and before it ended. So the rise of the modern man is actually the end of the age of the stars, I guess we could see as that. Okay, cool. We're getting some of the important things on our timeline now. It's going to be harder to sort of put a date on these because year 0 begins here on the current calendar. But we could always say something like 50 years ago. If we call it years ago, then we're not actually having to give a calendar structure to these, because that we don't know what the calendar was like in some of these times. So we could just say approx 50 years ago, something like that. And I'm not sure if we set on 50 years for this. We could have less if we want, or more, but we'll say. And Twitch really needs some categories that aren't I'm streaming XYZ game. Yeah, I think so too. I think it would really help for visibility for creatives and anyone in general that streams. And so probably prior to the sophisticated government, now is more of a local government approach, small fiefdoms that was consolidated over the year. Okay, so yeah, so before the age of before the official government was formed, should we word this as more of a so it sounds more stronger and like a bigger deal, because it was probably, like you say, lots of little factions and organisations, and I guess how it would be like in the urban city where people are a little bit more divided, but there's still some kind of rule. It's just not like a established or strong law and order. So we'd have to think of how to word that one. And then, as Zexy said, there's also, what about something that's the equivalent of the Bronze Age or the tribal caveman age? I mean, this is a very medieval period that we're in the present day, really, in this, at least the part of the world that we're in. I guess it's thinking whatever happened before the medieval times. You had the Roman period and things like that. Then I suppose there would be this world's version of it, like around here as well. I have the age of modern men separate from the age of stars. Yes, so I'd say when we have a lot of time passes, we could say, I mean, we could also have it as this, the age of stars ends. So it's already ended and a new era has started for the rise of the modern man. Something like that. And we could say the same for these two. And obviously there's going to be all these little details in between, so we won't fill them out for now because we haven't fleshed it out enough at this point in time, but just so we know that there's a spot there for stuff to go in. But at some point we're definitely gonna focus more on what's happened here, especially if we want to start having god streams. We'll look a little bit closer at that then. I guess we're looking more at this period for now, the modern day, because we're sort of working on filling out our modern calendar. And when is the age of reptiles? Well, that's another thing. I definitely don't want to neglect other species and races, and when different cultures started to form as well. I imagine we're definitely going to fill this out significantly. We're just plotting out the key things we've already set in stone for now. I would say that since you have a king, you need to decide how long the monarchy has been around. Awesome. So that's a good thing to point out. So guys, what do you reckon? The king before or after the government, or at the same time? So, because then we can add that there too. Also, when the first king was crowned. Yeah, it's going to be fun because once like we've set a date on this, we'll know exactly how many years have passed. We can like literally plan the generations of kings like nerds together if we wanted to. Write up bios for them all. Because it's just so fun. I mean, even if the game only doesn't even talk about the older kings much in passing, I'm just still a nerd for making a very detailed, in-depth, rich world, even if the game only sees 20% of it. You never know. When it's there, when it's built, it could like sort of start a really interesting plot point or story element once the idea's there. It's been set. And super important question, is the government something that was formed cooperatively like the UN, or was it built through conquest, fear and bloodlines? And probably the rise of modern men is also the modern reptiles. Yeah, there's a lot of details. So when we say rise of modern men, there's definitely going to be lots of branches and little intricate details from that, which will definitely flash out at some point even more. We'll get into more detail of which races came first and which ones, as for what Zexy says, the government, was it built through conquest, fear and bloodlines? That's another thing to consider too. Feel free to give your thoughts, folks, based on what we know of our government so far. The fact that we've got them discovering the X in raindrops, they seem they'd be hungry for power. They like the control and the structure. I think that's pretty much clear because they came up with this idea to create a currency from this X in raindrops. So it's whatever we feel is most appropriate for this government, because there's still a lot of blanks. We haven't, other than Traitorio and the king, we don't have any government figures in the game yet. So it's going to be a good idea to get some vague ideas, because at some point we're going to really make a complete cast of characters of the government, people who are still alive today in the government and people who have died in generations gone, who people are influenced by today potentially. Good day, Rose and chat. Hi, Looking Glasses. How's it going? It's good to see you. We're making a timeline, Looking Glasses, and anyone who comes in. This timeline will eventually be put. This is just our notes, our rough draft, but it's going to eventually be placed on this calendar. All the key spots. I mean, this is a monthly calendar, so probably not this one. But that we'll probably do an actual calendar like this of this sort of user interface to plot that out. But for things like this, we're going to have some things on here which we sort of will get to as we get closer to the modern day, which will be here. At the point where Carol meets the hero and the spell the Everbloom Forest happens, that's going to probably be when we start plotting them on the calendar. And this law building is so awesome. Yeah, it's so fun, isn't it? Because it really just makes the world, it builds it and makes it so much richer, rather than having a generic world of nothing. I think any game, I think it can help massively to like really have this, just adds so much. And hi Matt, how's it going? Well, if you want a history like Europe, then before the empire there were city-states, and after there were smaller principalities and duchies before they joined into kingdoms. Alright, so that's interesting to consider too. So I would say city-states would be the rise of modern men stage, then the first empire, then the empire's fall, then the establishment of the current government. Yeah, because I suppose thinking of it like us with the Romans, they were around before the Middle Ages really formed. So if we want to say where are we? Oh my goodness. If the rise of modern men if we see that as, yeah, how do we define modern men? Do we mean like cavemen, just humans coming into existence altogether? Because when I think of modern men, I think of civilized men, not just any random ones. So but yeah, I think Matt's got a point. There's definitely going to be more that's happened between the rise of modern men and when the government was formed, which is why we've got these question marks here. So, and then like we say, the king, that as well. So we'll have to plot them somewhere where we think's best. And the rise of modern men people shouldn't be a short time period. Yes, so maybe we should put a lot of time passes here, just so it doesn't seem like it's all happening too fast, just like we've done for these ages. But I'm still struggling to define modern man, like whether we need to reword that so it's more clear. And that's a right way to go about it. Even if certain historical events aren't mentioned, the effects could still be felt in culture, politics, local customs, fashion, and countless other. Exactly, looking glasses. I have the opinion that whatever we write in terms of law, the game itself won't even see a lot of it, but I just like that it's there because it can really inspire ideas, and like you say, it can just really help build that culture and make it seem real and like it actually isn't, it just makes it more immersive, the story and everything in general, because there's this whole history that it's been built from. And it's probably filled with what Met said above, even clans, tribes, wandering, etc. Yeah, okay, so tribes is a great word. So tribes and clans form. Yeah, I'm not going to get rid of the word modern. I don't know what you guys think, but the word modern's just throwing me a bit, because when I think modern, I think like now, like very 19th, 20th, 21st century era. But if we say the rise of men, it makes me think, yeah, that could definitely be tribes. And then, as Met says, we've got the empires probably as well. An empire forms and eventually falls. I mean, we could always split that and put the empire forms as a different date to when the fall is eventually. Yeah, we gotta still think king and queen as well. So, do we want that before or after the government? A monarchy. I don't know. Feel free to flesh this out for me, folks, if you've got any thoughts or you feel that the time should be switched around for some. But this is all very rough right now. Hi, Azrael, as well. Did I say hi? Did I say hi to you, Azrael? I hope I did. Considering there are several races, it might be that there are a few different nations in the world. Yeah, for sure. It's definitely way more complex than here, because different races started up different things, you know. And when, like, as even saying the monarchy, there's the human monarchy with the King Dolos that's on our law Bible, but then we've got a potential king and fairy queen in the cloud kingdom as well, so that's 2. So there's just so many different branches and different kinds of things. So I think at some point we're going to have a stream where we think of those branches and just make this a little bit more detailed to this period of time here. If there's an age of gods, humans are probably psychologically modern by the time it ends. So I'm taking it more as a cultural rise. Fair enough, yeah. So it's how we view it. As say, everyone's got a different perspective for what modern men could stand for. And I think it's type of people more as a biology thing. People that are currently seen in the world today, yeah. So yeah. I guess if that's the case, it's fine to have it there. We could even move this one here so that it becomes clear that the tribes formed shortly after the rise of men, and then a lot of time passes before an actual empire forms and monarchy and government, because I imagine, just like it is here, there would have been a lot of time that would have passed between such an advancement. So that's why awesome. That's cool, Van, no worries. And if you could include detail of explaining why changing styles of government or rulership have taken place, for example, the first king may have seemed like a great idea when a warrior of power and charisma helped unite warring factions and defend the region from invasion, but centuries later, kings during the times of peace may have given into self-serving debauchery, costing the crown power and prestige. Awesome. I'm gonna look through the VOD and reread that at some point, or I'll read it again in a set looking glass, because there's a lot of detail to what you've said and I don't want to miss any of that because it could be relevant. And how advanced do you want this fantasy world to be? Pick a technology level that you want the game to take place at, and boom, that's what modern means. Yeah, I'd say like it's around medieval, especially the place we're in. Everbloom, the capital, the farmlands, and all this east side of the world where the government rules quite strongly is sort of close to medieval in time period in how things are. Whereas the west, where things get a little bit more less rule, where the rough urban lands and badlands come into play, they could give the impression of being more of a slightly modern setting, because we're sort of losing that government thing, and there's more gangs around and chaos and crime lords and things like that. So that's different parts of the world sort of give off a different theme and vibe, which is great as well, because it makes it a diverse world and different, and it's changeable and it keeps things fresh. And so I don't think we definitely like set and this is a medieval game, because it's not. It's a fantasy. It's a bit of a kitchen sink, in other words, and it allows us to be a bit more creative if we're not sort of limited to a sort of look or period in time. But yeah, I'd say medieval is definitely what we're looking at for this area that we're in anyway. Although Everbloom Forest in itself is a lot more backwards, like in its time, people are sort of sleeping on hammocks, and it's a lot more campy, and people's way of life is a lot more humble there than in the capitals and the bigger towns further along. And modern could refer to when a certain type of technology came about. For example, the people of present time may consider the modern age to be marked by the discovery of steam technology of flight. Yeah, so things like technology and that, I mean, the cloud kingdom, steam could be a thing around that part of the world. I mean, how are people travelling to the clouds? And I definitely think the West probably are more advanced in technology, perhaps. The West, not the East. The East is the government side. I need to get the map up at some point, folks, so you can see the rough world map, because it's hard to sort of get what I'm talking about. But basically, to summarise it, the West is far more gritty and urban than the East, which is a lot more picturesque and traditional and government ruled. And we start in the East. Where Everbloom Forest is very, very close and probably the next zone to the capital. And the farmlands are the closest, but the farmlands are literally next door to the capital. So yes, they're all pretty close, and it's also interesting to think, what do the capital and what do the government think of Everbloom? Have they thought about deforesting the place for their own greed? That's another thing too, because the people living in Everbloom seem pretty happy and settled, like they enjoy that way of life and they're very used to it and very stuck in their ways. So I don't think they'd appreciate any interference. But I could imagine the government would think Everbloom had some use for them in terms of resources, with it being a flourishing forest. And there's a farm next to Everbloom, so it's already been started to be cut down for farmland. The area by Father Maples had trees be chopped down, so that's already been started to be sort of taken down, that part of the forest. So for sure, that's an interesting theme to potentially explore too, if we wanted to, because I do know we briefly discussed that, but not much. And technology, it's still a question mark, because I don't like to say no, we don't have high technology, because we might want to explore that. When we get to the urban lands, we might want to explore a more like slightly advanced technology zone, because it could change things up a bit and may be interesting to explore different things. But I try to not set things too much in stone for zones that we haven't that aren't in the current episode, but it's still nice to have an idea. But for sure, the Everbloom zone and the nearby places to Everbloom will be probably way more fleshed out than places far out that are a bit more mysterious to the folks that live here. But we'll see. It's still cool to talk about things, and that you bring things up, guys, because it puts questions in your mind and things to consider. Hi, Forgotten, how you doing as well? It's good to see you. And incidentally, to what I currently know, what we know of the Middle Ages is confused by centuries of elaborate tax evasion schemes. Yeah, and feel free to look. There's a lot of stuff you guys are talking about today, and it's all really cool, but I'm very much likely going to have to read it back in the VOD after stream, folks, because there's definitely a lot of stuff to take in here. But if anyone wants to expand on it, feel free to, especially if you want to do that in the ideas discussion on Discord even. Hi, how is it been going, Rose and Raindrop family? And yeah, how are you doing, Forgotten? How have things been on your end? It's awesome to see you. So that's interesting that humans didn't rise until after the Age of Stars. So who passed down the stories from the Age of Stars? The fairies. Interesting question, Matt. So we know that the Age of Stars, which we could see as the time when, all these legends of old that Hank talks about in the flashback that are the gods of today, that is basically the age when they lived, like some of the more prominent people in that era anyway. Because really, since when the stars stopped changing, there was still legends of old appearing in the sky of the modern times at that point. But some of the real historical ones that people absolutely, the main gods, the main pantheon, I guess you could say, there were these guys. Who passed down the stories, that's something to consider as well, all those little details. So whether it was history books left behind, or people's elders just passed down the stories to them through time, and religions form and people latch on to those as people die and are born. But if anyone's got any specific thoughts on that, feel free to say, because it's only vague in my mind right now how that could have gone about. Pardon me. But next week, folks, we will be likely thinking more specifically about cultures and religions, and obviously that includes a pantheon and gods, and important figures and people will come up from that as well. So if a group of people get desperate and legitimately need tons of wood to maintain their way of life, their justification could be they have so many trees they can spare a few so we can live. This could lead to an attempt invasion war if the two sides can't agree. Yeah, and there's going to be there's a chance we're going to have a plot point where the government have a bit of a nosy around Everbloom at some point within the caves, and I suppose people could be concerned about that because they could think, what are they doing here? Are they after our land? Are they stealing our resources? They could have a ton of theories, but there could be other reasons why they're around as well. It's going to be a bit mysterious potentially, but it's going to be, I think it's important to introduce the government early, at some point in episode 1, during the whole cave sequence with the reptiles. The government are sort of going to get introduced in the plot in a subtle way, where someone's having a nosy in the cave that's a government scientist or something, at the least anyway, and it's sort of going to bring up that side of things to the story, even if it's just vague and not a big deal at this point. I think the government will become more key in the game by episode 2. For sure, because we'll be moving on to the farmlands, and the farmlands is next door to the capital, so for sure once we get that means if we're going to the capital, then for sure episode 2 is going to be more government focused. And maybe the swamp area used to have farming but it got polluted. Yeah, so that's interesting to consider too, because the swamp in itself is going to be a creepy sort of abandoned zone in the present day, but I could imagine that there'll be an NPC, someone who's very keen to start up a business there, the sandwich factory, the theme park. They'll want to get that up and running. Potentially, I could imagine someone would want to do that. But in the present day, it's pretty dead, pretty deserted, and people could, I like it as being an idea of people having a nosy and exploring things that shouldn't be in the swamp, because there could be a lot of government evidence and dodgy stuff around that swamp. It's next to the capital, the swamp, as well, so it's a base of operations potentially for them as well. Yeah, so I think maybe, yeah, that's right. The swamp could have been a farm at one point in time, and now they're sort of thinking of turning the area into Everbloom into a farm in the more present day. And that's why we've got a local farmland next door to Everbloom, because the forest is slowly getting turned into farms. They haven't quite turned Everbloom into a farm just yet, but they're getting there. The area by Father Maple already has been chopped down and is a right mess. And that's why Father Maple's peeved off as well. One of the reasons why he's peeved off, because he's seen all his fellow trees get chopped down, and there's tons of dodgy stuff going on there. But yeah, so that's another interesting theme for a forest area. But it definitely would, it's definitely cool to consider the government's relationship with Everbloom Forest rather than make them not connected at all. because then it subtly sort of can introduce them in episode 1 as well. And we are in a never-ending lockdown. How you doing, Raz? I take it that episode 1 is coming together nicely. Yeah, we're doing a few weeks of world building, and although we're sort of going to try to mainly focus on Roots and Rumours content and Everbloom Forest lore mainly, we do kind of talk about the bigger picture a little bit as well, because it's nice to build the history as a whole for the world, because I'm doing a lot of game dev stuff off stream at the moment, and we're using the next few weeks an opportunity to just build the history, because it can't be neglected. And okay, if medieval is modern, then the stars stopping closer to Roman, then the stars the stopping was close to Roman Empire, the moon stopping is closer to ancient Greece, exists current form biology closer, and then still plenty of time behind that for older tribal stuff. Yeah, I guess it depends. I mean, I might be wrong. You guys might have seen it differently. But I was imagining the rise of men included tribal and ancient Greece and Rome. Like, as soon as the rise of men comes, that's when you get all those things kicking off. But before then, it was all pretty mysterious, and man didn't really have an effect on the world or civilization, and didn't ruin the world up until that point. So yeah, I guess we got to think of years as well, like how many years ago some of these was, because that can help a lot. So if we say if this was 50 years ago when the government created the raindrops, the Roman Empire was about a couple of thousand years ago, right? So so if we want to match planet Earth here, we would say something like that. But we can change it, we can make it unique if we want, and different if it's not going to work. Because we don't have to 100% parallel planet Earth, do we? Just because we have to consider things, and we might want a shorter period of time that passed in certain times. But we're welcome to be creative and write our own story. We don't have to 100% match. But what do you reckon? Feel free to say your thoughts, folks. This is all just ideas at the moment, so I'll put a question mark, because I'm not sure if we should have it be that long ago. Oh, what am I doing? I'm a silly. I'm thinking present day is in 2020 yet. We got to think of medieval. So if we say 15th century, that would have been 500 years ago-ish. Guess it depends. Completely ignore what I've said, folks, because 2,000 years is way too much. I was being an idiot and thinking 2020 and counting back to then, but we got to think of ourselves in a medieval period, so it's more around that, if so. Perhaps, or even if we want 1,000. I know. And I was thinking that tribes should exist in earlier ages for there to be legends and books from then, though they could have been scattered by whatever brought about a new age. And I was thinking of it, tribe including much smaller groups than ancient Greeks. It says there are definitely small villages before. Yeah, so I don't know, guys. Maybe you guys have a point, Zexian, met that we could see it as tribes were around this time. I guess it's because we need to sort of, it's hard to think of that right now. I mean, what do you think, Van? Because Van sort of come up with the idea of the age of stars and the gods and ancients, so maybe Van has an idea as well of what sort of people were living around that time. Because I'm sort of not sure yet whether we should have the tribes here or we should bring them further up and stretch it up a bit. So, but it's all just rough. Like I'm putting down a certain amount of years here, but it's nothing set in stone until we're happy with it, right? And in real life, the rise of men was before the Mycenaean Greece, and much civilized. That's strictly Eurocentric take, just ignoring Asian history. All right, so I would say the Age of Stars is about 1500, 200 year period. Okay, so okay, and what sort of people, like, would you say lived? Because I'm finding it difficult to imagine the people that lived back then. I suppose it's because it's difficult to, it's more vague, you see. So I'm not even sure myself whether we should have it all happen here or before. But feel free to say, guys, I've got brain melt at the moment from all the ideas and chats. You'll have to forgive me. But while we're doing that, we can start on the present day stuff, because it's getting all confusing when we think so far back. But we can go back to it in a bit. It's okay, Rose. Yeah, I'm getting all brain melty. Okay, so we'll switch things up and talk more about the present time, guys, because that was what today's stream was actually meant to be about, in all honesty, this period here, so we could fill in our current present day calendar. But we've been talking about way back, which isn't a problem. Like, I think it's totally cool to talk about this, but you know, that can be more for next week as well, because it's hard to like 100% set in stone that far back when we haven't even properly set in stone this. So you got to keep us on task, yeah. Okay, so it's just so overwhelming, right, when you think of history as a whole and all the thousands of years and all the periods. So it's pretty, I like to think of it bit by bit rather than think, oh my gosh, we got all this and we got to fill it in. But yeah, so bit by bit, like if we want to focus on the Age of Stars, then yeah, I'm just getting all brain melty. Cool. I'll try and talk about the deep past stuff and this. Yeah, if you guys want to put it in the ideas channel, that might be easier for me to sort of absorb the info. There's been a lot said in chat, and that's friggin' awesome, because I really love it when world building streams are very chat heavy, in all honesty, because it shows everyone's excited. But obviously, I'm sure you guys understand when there's a lot to read, it can also be a lot to take in as well. And okay, so from the timeline, well, the Age of Stars probably would include the end of the decline of ancient civilizations and the start of the wandering tribes. Yeah, okay, so it is overwhelming, just Greek mythology by itself. Yeah, exactly, Zexy. Like, and I'd have to, like, in all honesty, watch a ton of documentaries on things like that, especially if we decide to build that history a little bit more thoroughly, so I can refresh myself on that, some of the historical periods of time. But yeah, like we probably help to get a really vague, rough timeline out of history of planet Earth, and sort of think of a parallel to that and match it up with ours, which I'm sure we can do. But we can always focus more on that in a bit once we've filled in these dates as well. Alright, so the spell in Everblue Forest happens. That was 15 months ago, folks. So I'm sort of going back down now to this closer to the present day time. But I'm not like saying don't ever talk about this, guys. If you guys still want to talk about that and you've got ideas for that, I don't want to stop you. So feel free to, but it might be easier to talk about it in the ideas discussion channel, especially if it's lengthy and there's something that's really like a lot to sort of absorb. But if it's anything briefer, I don't mind chatting about it on actual stream. From that period, there's probably tech magic from the past that is lost as ancient civilizations become dust to those that live in this age. Yeah, and that's another thing as well. So, like, this period, yeah, like, this whole period here, it's just such it's a huge thing in itself, right? So I could imagine I'll really need to get into focus mode just for that bit alone. But right now I'm split between thinking of that and this, so it's a lot to take in. So if we focus on one bit of the timeline at a time, it's definitely easier and it helps break things up a bit more. And also, Rez, if you want me to add new stuff that you come up with today in the main time, actually let me know and you can send it to me and I do. Yeah, sure, man. I mean, what we've got here is not really much different than what we already all know so far anyway. We're sort of just adding everything that's been set in stone in our story streams. So I don't think there's going to be anything that's going to be completely new right now, but over the next few streams we'll probably be definitely adding some extra things. Alright, so Carol meets the hero. That is the latest thing, the latest thing that we know in the present day. That's when episode 1 begins. So what I was thinking, back to the calendar, I think it should be in old green when this happens, simply because I was having a think and a few things add up for it falling in the spring and being this period in time. Based on when the Barrels were born and when Carol's parents got killed and what was happening when Carol's parents got killed, which we'll talk about in a sec. So we'll say old green, year 124, 124 years after year 0. And then the bit before that, if we look on our timeline here, 1 month ago Carol was separated from her family, so that means that happened in full green if that's the case. So yeah, we're thinking of the really like tiny, small current things at the moment, and maybe we can like slowly go back once we've done that. That might be a bit easier. Hi Rose, how are you? Hi Rod, how's it going? It's good to see you. I hope you're good. How are things? And yeah, actually the newest age where the story takes place is called the Age of the Hero. Yeah. That's definitely true. It is the age of the hero. The hero is going to have a massive impact on the story. He's going to change the world, or she or they. And it might help if you picked a few themes that you want the game to focus on, a moral message that you want to impart onto the player. By knowing what your goal is or what you want your game to say, we might have a better context what a timeline needs to be in order to get. Yeah, I think that can help too, to break things down. Rather than, because it can easily get overwhelming if you just consider everything, right? So I'd say bringing up what Zexy says before we carry on, I think the Raindrop Chronicles saga, each episode will have its own sort of moral messages and themes. There might be an overarching story, which of course there will be. It'll be a continuous series that carries on. However episode 1 ends, episode 2 will begin. But I'd say because we go into different places and there'll be different settings per episode, we have a chance to explore different themes in each episode, because we'll be meeting different cultures, different people, different groups in each episode, and it stops it being samey if there's different themes per episode as well. And I'd say Everbloom, Lightfall, episode 1, Roots and Rumours. The main themes that stick out to me with Roots and Rumours are definitely community, togetherness, exclusion, new life, and things like that, because obviously new life, because things have come to life like the barrels and sentient objects. So definitely new life is a key thing, and I suppose it's about community and togetherness, and in the way that people are sticking together. The humans are lightful, the reptiles are sticking together, the barrels stick together with their own, and the fruits stick together with their own, and they sort of exclude and get very against anyone that's not like them. So they're fixed in their traditions and their ways, and that's definitely things that are standing out to me with Roots and Rumours. I mean, with the title, you can kind of get an idea that gives a lot of imagery and themes in itself. And we've talked about this a little bit before in the character arc streams as well. Like we said, Carol's arc is all about wanting to find belonging deep down, and that's why she's searching for a family, because she thinks she can find that belonging with them and not anybody else, because she doesn't trust humans enough. She doesn't think she'd ever find that with them. And I think the whole belonging arc in itself with Carol is her overarching arc for the whole of the saga, not just episode 1. So she is a character that represents that theme in itself, and I think that's what it's probably, because she's like such a key character, like the main character, I suppose that's why it's kind of good that the first episode starts with those themes more than anything. But there could definitely, once we get to episode 2, we could sort of be exploring different things as well. It wouldn't continue with the whole exclusion theme and community. Potentially there could be other things that happen, interesting things that get brought, because it could get a bit samey if every single episode just focuses on that one, right? But I think it's cool and interesting that, and I think it's fitting for the whole world and zone that we're building here with those themes and the plot points and that we've had so far with the fruits, the barrels, Fiona and Nigel, and him needing his sister. That is like definitely a sense of community, and Fiona not feeling like she can escape because being fixed in traditions and ways and things. And there's going to be more characters that will probably parallel similar themes but have their own as well. That way the story's bringing out the importance of the hero to this point in history. Yeah, the Age of Fruits. Good deal, glad to hear the Barrel Gang always roll together. Going for lunch, any plans for tomorrow and the weekend? Not sure, probably just chilling again, Rod. What about you? Just doing my same old. But yeah, so any thoughts on that, folks, based on the Roots and Rumours, what we know about it so far in regards to story themes? With history and things, it would be really cool if we could sort of consider things like that so it's relevant and relates. I think so too. But we don't have to 100% limit ourselves to those themes, like I said, because episode 2, episode 3 onwards could give us a chance to explore other interesting things as well, potentially. So it's whatever it sounds intriguing to us. Alright, so where were we? She was separated from her family then. Now, a month before that, her parents would have died. So that isn't on the timeline yet, but we always knew her parents would have died in between Oliver's birth and obviously when she was separated from her family, because obviously it couldn't have happened after then, because the parents weren't in the flashback scene. They were already perished by that point. She would have been old enough to take it all in, and it would have been recent enough for Carol to still have anger, and a lot of her, because Carol's full of anger, and a lot of that comes from past pain from her tragic event. So I feel like 2 months is definitely fitting. And that would have that really falls nicely, having it be 2 months ago, happening in New Green, because that would have realistically, sort of, I think a founding festival would be sort of appropriate to be in this month, perhaps. And so, because when I think of founding festivals, I don't know, it gives me sort of springy vibes, and that's what New Green is. So 1 month ago, fill that in so we know. Now, or present day, Carol's parents were killed during during April's founding festival. I mean, we don't even have to have it be the founding festival. We could have it be the spring festival if we wanted, but if we wanted it to be a separate thing. But, you know, founding festival feels a little bit more developed, because it fits with Lightfall and the fact that it was taken over and conquered from the reptiles many years ago, and they'd probably do an annual celebration for that, perhaps. Perhaps the different eras mirror the conflicts in the main characters are going through. The era is brought to an end because people of the time made the wrong choices, and main characters find happiness, not repeating history, but with nuance and good writing and stuff. Yeah, I think it's good to have a sort of pattern like that, and consider it like that, rather than just be random, you know. So I think that's clever. I think that's smart. So we're definitely going to flesh these eras out more, folks, especially in the next couple of weeks, these older historical eras. So we'll keep things like that in mind when we form the pantheon, and just flesh out the different eras, different things that each of them stood for, and themes, bring in some strong themes. Maybe there's a god or an important person that existed back then that was all about community and people accepting each other, no matter what your species, and that could sort of tie into the whole Everbloom Forest moral message that needs to be said deep down. And Everbloom seems like it would have been founded before year 0, unless this is meant to be year 15 or so when the game starts. Oh, so we set the spell at 123, so Fiona's parents died, it would be the 2010s. Yeah, so these dates, the 124, it's because it's 124 years after year 0, and year 0 is only significant in the way that a new calendar begun then, because the stars stop changing at that point. And once the stars stopped changing, they had to change their calendar to the one that follows the sun, which is this one. So it's a recent development, that change. The stars, the last 100 years, it stops it being as overwhelming then, to have to plan out loads of modern government leaders that would have existed. There's only a few generations that way, several generations should I say, since year 0 rather than bazillions. But obviously modern life still existed well before year 0, when they followed the older calendar, the calendar of the stars, before they changed. There was a lot of medieval era, the monarchy, the government still exist, and they discovered the X in raindrops. I suppose we got to think of an approximate how many years ago that would have been. So as far as that, when Everbloom was founded, yes, it probably happened a while ago. I suppose we have to think of when it was that the reptiles would have lived there, because they did live there before the humans did, and get an idea in time from that. But you know, a founding festival could definitely be something that was celebrated annually, like every single year, just like we celebrate you know, Independence Day here on Earth, or Remembrance Day, and all these days that we celebrate here every year. It's like a tradition. So I mean, we can plot a point where Everbloom, I mean, the war happened 17 years ago, so let's just put that there as well. I was like, nothing significant has happened between the spell and when the stars stopped, but there was obviously a point in time that was significant that happened 17 years ago. What's that have been it? I can't count. Yeah, that's 17 years, 124 minus. I'm gonna have to get a calc out, because honestly I can't do numbers. Especially when I've got brain melt. Yeah, it is 107. So that would have been the war between humans and reptiles. Would have happened then, because I think we set on 17 years ago, didn't we, from the present day. And for the actual founding of Lakefall, when humans started populating Lakefall, I don't know if it should be too long ago, because the reptiles are still very angry and wish for change. I think if it was too long ago when the reptiles were thrown out of their homes, they'd have already got used to life in the caves, and that would have just become the norm for them, and that why would it have took them that long to have the war? But there's probably been loads of eras of Lakefall, like things that people who lived there before even the reptiles once upon a time, perhaps. But maybe the reptiles just lived there for centuries, perhaps, because it feels like the reptiles should be the ones that have been more established in Lakefall in history than the humans. So and don't forget, Rex's character is very angry and wants to form a resistance in the modern day, and I feel like he needed to really be quite young, at least, when all this was happening. Otherwise, why is he so bothered, unless he just was bitter from what his ancestors told him? So I don't know, like, maybe this could change. I'm not gonna put on an exact date here, but humans conquered Lakefall. And took the land from the reptiles. The reptiles moved to the caves. That's a bit wordy. Something like that. I feel like not much time could pass between then and the war, because like the opportunities, it would feel a bit weird if decades had gone by. They've probably spent several years planning, right? They've got angry, they've hate that way of life, and then have come to get revenge. And the reptiles still alive today, you know, that they would have lived in that period, and it would have stories to tell, potentially. So I'm thinking that, but I'm not 100% set on it. Could change my mind if something doesn't work, but that's what I'm thinking right now. So the reptiles are nostalgic for the 80s, maybe. It's good to have some 80s nostalgia. I mean, we have to warm to the reptiles in some way. So Yeah, if that's the case, then the reptiles have really lived in Lakefall for a long time. The reptiles would have lived in Lakefall since the rise of men probably, then sadly in very modern times it just got conquered. So what do we have here? I would say that humans probably came earlier than 99 because 8 years isn't really yeah, maybe I'm being a little bit, I was thinking, that's why I put a question mark, because I wasn't set on the year 99. I guess deep down I just like the idea of some reptiles still being alive, that is still alive today, that were around when Lakefall did get conquered. So that would make it 25 years ago. We could easily add another, I mean, would 10 years be too much? If we say 87, that's 20 years of preparations, right? Maybe that's a little bit more realistic, and that would make it people could still be alive today, even if it was then. I would say 20 because people have come of age, heal, plan, yeah. So 7, yeah, 7's a bit of a rush. 20 years, yeah. But it's still short enough for it to be believable that they you know, have. Because if like 50, 100 years that would have passed, you'd think, come on, reptiles, get over it. Now, it's been decades, it's been generations, but it's still the same generation, and they're still bitter, and it works, I think, if we keep it not around that. I think any longer than 20 years, and then those old reptiles would have passed on, and people would have moved, the new generation of reptiles would have moved on and settled with their way of life in the caves by then. And humans conquering could be a few years before 99, but I can imagine if it was just before the year 100, they would use propaganda of the new century, new lands, new conqueror. Yeah, that's an interesting thing to point out about the new century. So, yeah, what do you reckon about that, like, new century stuff? Because something could have gone on there, that's for sure. It's good that you point that out, because it actually didn't come to my mind. Okay, so I was just getting the calculator up. So 87, that's 13 years from the new century, and we say it's I mean, if we do like the year 99, we could always alter the timeline if that's the case, because I think it's an interesting point, and it makes the timing of the fact that they're conquered then have more of a reason. And we could just always add years on to the present day timeline if that's the case, if we wanted to do that. We don't have to have it be 124. I can't even type into a calculator right now. 37 years between the present day and when the humans conquered Lakefall. Which would mean we could have Rex's character being a young reptile child when that happened. I think that could work if he was a young reptile child when because if it was 37 years ago, and say he was about, 30 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9, like a young child when it happened. I think he needs to be old enough to know what happened. So that would put him at his early 30s, like in age. I mean early 40s, sorry, as a reptile character. Maybe reptiles have, well, if they have a shorter lifespan than humans, then he'd need to be dead. he'd be an old man reptile if that's the case. Because I think how do you guys imagine reptiles' lifespans to be? I always imagine that the elves would, if anyone was going to have longer lifespans, it would be the elves. And if anyone was going to have shorter lifespans, it would be the beast races, which would mean that 40 years old for a reptile is a very old reptile. Which works. I think Rex's reptile could easily be an old man reptile. An old man of 40 something. But I do like the idea of him being a bit of an older reptile in that regard, and not but still young enough to fight. I guess, like, he's not like completely old, like he's helpless. So because then that makes him a reptile that lived in that time, and then it gives more of a reason for why he's so bitter, because he's seen it all. And it's hurtful. There's a lot of bad memories. He's not just heard it from word of mouth or from his ancestors. He's actually seen it and grown up in that era. So we talk about your character, Rex. Funnily enough, how are you doing? Depends. Giant turtles live a long time, but that's not the case for all reptiles. Yeah, I'm just thinking it kind of works that. I don't know, it makes sense for me for the elves and the fairies to have the longer lifespans, the humans to have a middle lifespan, average, like 70, 80 years as we do here, and then for the beast races to have slightly shorter ones, like 40 to 50 years maybe. But it could change, that's all just speculation at the moment. If we decide that some beast races live longer, that's fine. But whatever the case, Rex's reptile is going to be in his early 40s. It's hard, obviously, we don't know how the lifespan is, if it's short or long at this point. So who knows how old 43 is in reptile years. But that fits with our timeline, to have him be that age. Maybe the short lives make a statistic more likely to be murdered. That makes sense too. I think because reptiles are oppressed as well, it would be a bit strange if they had long lifespans, because naturally it makes more sense for the oppressed races to have the shorter lifespans and the more superior, arrogant ones to have the longer lifespans. So your reptile, if that's the case, might be a very old man, Rex. He's only 40 something, but he's an old man at 40. But I like it. I think that's intriguing. I think it makes sense that he's lived a lot of reptile. He's lived a long reptile age, and he's seen a lot of hate and being before him. In a way, he parallels Carol the Barrel in a lot of ways, because Carol's experienced hate against Barrel kind of out of just pure ignorance more than anything, and she's full of anger because she's seen her family get murdered, by accidentally, that is, because the humans of Lightfall didn't know the Barrels were lit alive, and your Rex reptile would have seen. His reptile can't get murdered, and it's sort of a parallel, and I think that's good because it keeps the similar themes together in the same episode. If that's the case, one sec. I just want to try something out. So 87 and 99 is 12 years after 87, right? So I'm adding 12 years to everything just to see something. Reason why I've added 12 years is because what Matt said about them using the excuse for new century, new lands, new conquests for the reason why they conquer. I feel I kind of liked that idea, that it falls on the new century. I kind of, hang on. I kind of liked it falling on 120 because it's a nice memorable date. But then it's not 17 years ago, it's 16 years ago. But that, it's not, doesn't really matter if the war was 16 years ago instead of 17, does it? It's not a significant difference. But I think that timeline could work. We've added a few extra years on, but it's not too many more. Now, to fill in some other gaps, so we've got 2 months ago, Carol's parents were killed during Lightfall's annual founding festival. So it makes it a bit more clear, because otherwise people would be like, it's just something they celebrate every year. Say yearly celebration. So that's something they've probably done since the year 100. And likely then, if that's the case, it could have been turned into the year 100 on New Green of that year, which is why they celebrate it during New Green every single year. New Green's the first month, so then it nicely fits in with first month of the new century when they conquered. So I'd say 99 to 100, simply because they probably needed the year 99 to prepare for the conquering. So it probably spanned the 2 years, but they finally conquered on New Green. We'll just say as 100. You know, it's new century, new thing. There we go. We can just set in stones the year 100 when they did it. But yes, they would have prepped during the year 99, obviously, because that was all the days before. I'm going to put in brackets as well. I think that's pretty interesting. Okay, and then 20 years of prep. The move to the caves, absolutely hated it and prepared for the war. And that works, because then that means Rex's character would still be believably alive today, and other reptiles that are living too. So the Carol's parents were killed 2 months ago in New Green yearly founding celebration of life. Oh, cool. And then Oliver came to life 3 months ago. That's the next thing on the list. So Oliver came to life, and that would have been, as we say, 3 months ago, which would make it, that's kind of old blue for Oliver, old blue of the previous year, old blue of year 135. We'll make it a little bit, just a bit more clarity that number means year. And I'm going to unbold this text here. think I'll feel a little bit more comfortable, folks, working on the ancient history once we've really just filled in these gaps on the modern timeline, present day timeline, because my mind was all like split with this and this before, so. But there'll definitely be a point in the next couple of weeks when we get to talk about that more for sure. It's going to be all about just filling time up with events and important people the next week or so. Oh, did we say decide what year the legendary tree was planted? Oh, and Rex has said something as well. I don't know if I read that. I'll read it in a sec. 1 minute, folks. So, did we decide what year the legendary tree was planted? We haven't, but that's definitely something to think about too. I imagine that Lakefall tree is very old because people are going to really care about that tree, and it's like a guardian, and it's ancient, and even before it became sentient, like because of the spell, it was probably a very admired and loved tree that has a ton of history. So I to be honest, I think that tree would have existed before even men did, and I think that it was probably the first tree in the world because it's got a quality to it that makes it wiser than men. So I'd be inclined to have it be, it could have come about before the rise of man. I'd be willing to think. Now, what do you guys think? Just to give it that real old wisdom kind of lore. Wouldn't be as convincing if it was too young. And Rex says maybe they're short lives and because it's more like yes, and if they were left alone, a lot of them would live humans by a decent amount, but that's just an idea. Maybe, yeah. And there comes, you think, so what makes someone have a shorter lifespan then? Is it because they get murdered, or is it just because they're more vulnerable to disease and illness and things like that? And I suppose environment affects that. Like if reptiles are living in the caves, their quality of life isn't going to be as good. So that might have not helped with their lifespans as well. And reptiles all around the world in general, in other zones, desert reptiles, for example, or they probably don't have good quality of life either, so that could have affected. But say if they remained in a nice thriving area like Lakefall, they could have grown to have very, very thriving lives. So it makes all that adds layers onto why the reptiles are so angry. Thank you, Lady Wrights, for those 50 bits. I appreciate it. How are you doing? Appreciate that. Oldest living tree in our world is over 5,000 years old. Oh, good bit of trivia there, Van. And we could always exaggerate it and make our tree even older just by a little bit, so that it sounds more epic. But if that's the case, so we've got year zero. Year zero, it's all very modern day, this section is. So that's only less than 150 years. So we need, and that's approximately 50 years ago. Gosh, let's get our brains into gear. $50 years before year zero. It's very messy. I think we need to get a proper, because we need to count back through time, I think, on some of these dates now. And I don't know if approx 50 years before year zero is very tidy, because if we don't put that, people will think it's approx 50 years before present day. So I've just got to get my brain into gear about the wording of this. But if that's the case, it's definitely going to be somewhere here. In fact, we'll just stick it here for now. The Lakefall tree was planted. And it's subject to change. We could always move that around if we're like, no, that shouldn't be there, we'll plop it there instead. But because we haven't filled these question marks in of the dates, it's difficult to set in stone 100% its position right now. Good idea gives that world tree mythology type feel, yeah. And possibly not sure how many thousands of years old it should be, but like the idea of some like ancient god or great spirit planting the tree as part of their garden, or something poetic like spraying from one of the tiers after a great tree. Yeah, if we want to do that, we can even make it be planted in the age of stars and gods then, and then it can have a link to them. You know, with the fact that there was a god alive, like a worshipped member of the pantheon, when that tree was planted, it makes the tree even more epic, right? And give more reason for people to worship it, because it's such a close link to someone special who used to be alive. So that tree might have started growing in the age of gods, which will make it fit with mythology. It depends whether the years and the age of gods is before the age of stars. Yeah, so I'm with you. I think we made it too young putting it there. I knew it was going to be before the rise of man, 100%, but we should put it well back in history. Just makes it even more epic. I'm just unbolding these because as we start filling in the years, all the bold is going to blend together and look a bit messy. So it's going to just be a bit clearer to see it like this. Alright, so let's make this tidier. So this was 136 years. So instead of writing it like this, we'll just say instead, so 50 onto that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that would be it, right? 186 years ago, the government would have created the currency of raindrops. If that's the case, we can always change it, because I did say between 10 and 50 years could have passed. I don't imagine a lot of years would have passed between when the government created the currency of raindrops and when the stars stopped changing. So I'd say a generation would be plenty of time for that change to have been witnessed after that time, right? So, and okay, so scientist discovers X in raindrops. We will have that as maybe the year before. How long do you reckon it would have took the government to officially create the currency and make it a global thing from when they actually saw it? Probably a couple of years, or is that too little a time? Oh no, that would be 188 years ago if we give it a couple of years. They might have needed a few years of research, so maybe 2 years is too generous. Well, about 5 years between the discovery and for when they actually created it and made it an official thing. And the government might have been formed typos. I'm being very rough with these dates here, folks. Feel free to give me your thoughts on the number of years that likely could have passed between these events. I imagine it's not going to be a long time, because as soon as a government's formed, like a powerful one that really wants to rule all of society, they would quickly latch on to anything as fast as possible that's going to make them more powerful, right? The centuries aren't going to go by. Usually advancements develop fast once advanced civilization that starts to take over. They're ambitious and hungry for power, as these government really are. They definitely would have seen that X and been like, oh my goodness, as soon as they could have. There would be a few years of development, social promotion, adoption, also propaganda against the currencies that are already available at that time. There would be the process and deliver that would need to be handled, and the research. Since it's raindrops, how are these things given to people as currency? Well, the idea right now is that they're bottled up in glass, perhaps like normal glass bottles. Like, that's how they're sort of distributed. Obviously that the government have these massive barrels and warehouses that collect the raindrops with X and absorb that X, the special barrels, and it's these humongous probably containers that they have. They eventually just sort of put them into smaller containers so that they can distribute it to the public, because I don't imagine they'd give the public massive containers of raindrops, right? They'd give them smaller little glasses because they wouldn't want them to be rich not richer than them. So yeah, that's something like that. In glass bottles it might get distributed, or anything that can hold water that's big enough to carry in a pocket or carry with you without being too heavy. And then it gets carried to those bottles in mass quantities might get carried to the banks, and then the banks give each of those bottles to the citizens when they need the money. Something like that. The drops coated with something magical that makes them hold shape and keep them together. Then you could give them out like coins. Maybe drops are put inside a resin with the images of the king. Yeah, I mean, I kind of like the idea of keeping them as visually close to raindrops as we possibly can, so that the imagery of Raindrop Chronicles is kept. So I like the idea of keeping a liquid currency, but whatever they're in, the raindrops, they'll be in packaging, of course, whether it's a glass bottle or something else. And whatever that packaging is could totally have some sort of mark or images of the king on the lid, or on the bottom, on the base of the bottle, anywhere, probably the lid maybe. So that's something as well to think about. We'll probably even have a stream where we really get the imagery set and in stone for the raindrops, because of course that's going to be important to the game, because when we get our money from in the game, from when we get to shops and trade and get to the banks, we might not visually actually see it in game, but we might see a small little pixel version of it in game. So it'll be cool to still consider what that's all going to look like. Perhaps transactions can be weighted that tells you how many raindrops are in your container wallet. Yeah, I mean, think about it, folks. We'll definitely have a stream on it, and we might do a mood board. And if anyone's got anything visual related to that, feel free to drop it in the Discord or in stream today. Any pictures of how they imagine raindrop currency to look, if it's packaged up or anything close, because if we do a mood board, we'll probably get a few different ideas in mind for how it could look. Glass bottles was just like my initial one. Alright, so Van did say something like, yeah, you get propaganda of people fighting against the new currency. That makes a lot of sense. So because of that, I think we should push it back a bit more. I think 5 years was too little. Like if we do that, that's 9 years, and 9 years to sort of get it in place seems a little bit more realistic, jumping over all the hurdles that would have needed to jump over to sort of get that to become a currency. Feel free to say if you think it should be longer than that. Yeah, and keep that as that. I think keeping that as that could be fine. And maybe a monarchy wouldn't really form much before the government, because if the kings or queens are anything like King Dolos just latched on to Traitorio as fast as he could, because he couldn't do it on his own. Couldn't rule on his own. He needed help, and Traitorio probably manipulated him. So if they might have been keen on forming the government forming around them fast. I don't know, but again, maybe something like that though existed a little bit before, but not long before. But we can always extend that time if we feel maybe I'm being way too little with the amount of years in between here. Alright, so if we want something that parallels the Roman Empire, when did what year was it when did the first king? Just doing a bit of research. There was still like sort of monarchy, king, like in BC, like before the medieval eras. Say in Britain, king in England. Um, 10th century it was, so So, 1,000 years before, when did the Romans, I need to get up on my history. Okay, so 395 after death, so about 5,000 years between these, perhaps then, if that's the case. Something like... Feel free to give your thoughts, folks, if you think these years could do with altering, or they're not very realistic, or there's a sort of flaw I've not spotted. Feel free to say. We'll say the monarchy forms. It's a little bit more. And government should be capital letter, right? Well, we need to word that as that falls, because obviously they would have formed a long time before they fell. All right. So we are getting we're slowly moving into history again. We'll revisit that in a sec, because I just wanted to finish the present day timeline. We're jumping about all over the place here. Back to the present day again. So Oliver came to life 3 months ago, and that would have been Old Blue year 135. So because we're now in Old Green is the present day. So 1, 2, 3, yeah, Old Blue for Oliver, that's fine. Now Carol and the others, Mara and Woody, were born 3 months before that, so that would make them 1, 2, 3 Old Rose. Okay, year, and that's the same year. Because the lifespan of barrels, it's very fast. Carol, you know, they're different because they're not biological like the other races, so they were brought to life from a spell, and they instantly they don't, you know, things are a little bit different for them. That's why Carol's so intelligent at 6 months old. Yep, because things are a bit different when it comes to barrels. Right, so Carol came to life, as well as Meryl and Woody. And then 3 months before that, 1, 2, 3, Old Gold. And this is already established on our timeline with the barrels anyway, so this is easy really, because we already know what it is. This would have been when Carol's parents came to life. And then 1, 2, 3. 12 months exactly for this one. 12 months exactly after the present day, which, as said here, that was when Hank and Alvira came to life, exactly 12 months ago. The first generation of containers and of sentient objects in general. So that not only was when Hank and Alvira came to life, but it was also when objects came to life. Hank and Alvira are 2 of the firstborn. So that's a very significant part in the timeline as well, because that was the moment that Everbloom Forest started changing, exactly 1 year ago from now. And the spell of the Everbloom Forest happened, that was 15 months ago, so 3 months before they actually came to life, because the spell needed time to adjust and settle. It wasn't instant, it wasn't like the spell happened and everything just suddenly came to life. It all slowly came to life, gradually, and in a way they formed generations from who came to life first. So if that was 3 months before, then 1, 2, 3, Old Blue. But of the previous year. The very end of the 13-4 or 1-3-4, or yeah, however we want to word it. Spell of the Ever, and you know, that's an interesting time. Old Blue, it was right at the end of the year when that person did that spell. Maybe there could have been a motive for why they chose that day. Because people were out celebrating the end of the year and were preoccupied, so it was easy for him to sort of get, not be seen and slip through unnoticed. That seems likely. And also because it's cold and everybody's indoors, even though Everbloom Forest probably doesn't have a drastic winter. And yeah. And they couldn't be indoors anyway because they've got to be on the hammocks. Right, it's more likely that people were off celebrating and were distracted, maybe. So maybe the spell podcaster chose this time of year because they knew people would be preoccupied celebrating the end of year. Because, you know, that's something to consider too. Like, how on earth did he slip through and do this spell unnoticed and steal the barrels without being seen by anybody? That's one reason. And we don't have a month set on when the war happened between the humans and reptiles yet, so the moment it's just a question mark. But we know that the humans did conquer Lightfall during New Green, the very first month of that year of the new century, which falls nicely with New Green, obviously being the annual month that celebrates the founding because it happened then. So that timeline works really well, and I like in Old Green. It feels great for the present day, the month, because that colour is actually the exact same colour of the grass of Everbloom Forest, funnily enough. So colour scheme wise, it fits. Whether I'm going to make the visuals change colour scheme month by month, I don't know yet. Haven't made up my mind. But it's still cool to think it matches. So I think all the year 0 onwards period is filled in now. So now we can go back to further through history. I probably feel a bit better now exploring some of the older stuff now that's all filled in and we know it all works. So we've got to this point. Tribes and clans form. Okay, so we've said that. How long did the Roman Empire actually, how long were they in power? Apparently from 27 BC to 4076 AD, so that's the span of 500 years. Although another article says 1,000 years. But we don't have to 100% parallel it. What do you guys think? I know, but we could. We'll see if we'll try and get it around the same and see how it forms. And if we get a sort of realistic time period, then it's totally fine. We say something like this, then we're going for like about an 8,000 year mark. 800, sorry. The empire forms. Get the wording consistent, talking present instead of past. Doesn't have to be it's good to be inspired, and I think it's nice to have a parallel because then you can relate to Earth a lot easier and things make sense, because civilizations and how they form and get shaped, I imagine they'd work similar, but it doesn't literally have to be an exact match year, century, by the year. So it's cool that we're just doing it in a rough way. Okay, so then we got here tribes and clans form. Now we did discuss this before, and this was when I got the brain melt a little bit earlier. A few of you, like Zexy, Van and Met, I think you all sort of said that some of these tribes and ancient Greeks and could have been in these ages. They don't have to be part of the modern era. That could be way further back. And I suppose when you think about like ancient Greeks and that, like a lot of the gods and that come from that too, so it kind of would work, I think, doing it that way. So let's add modern men back again and move that there. And put that as the empire forms. Maybe we could see the more ancient Greek. Around the age of stars. I'm going to have to look back in chat to see what you guys said about where it could fall, so that might not be it. I'll just stick it there for now. Or was it the age of gods? Maybe that's better for the ancient Greek period. Let me just do a bit of Google research. Yeah, so they came before the Romans. So realistically, it makes sense to have the ancient Greek period just before we've got this empire. So it kind of works to have it be during the age of stars, because someone would have needed some type of civilization, and peoples would have had to have been around back then. I'm going to have a quick browse through chat, because I know you guys were having a chat about this and I want to remember where you said. So tribes, like wandering tribes, and that's another one. So we did have the tribes, I like the word wandering, it makes it a little bit descriptive. So wandering tribes and clans form. Does it work to have that in the same age as the age of the stars? I have got to review the notes that was sent over about that a while back on the Google sheet, because it might give me a bit more insight. And the types of peoples that would be around that you say. What are you needing? What I'm doing now is, because we're going back in time now, I've finally filled out all the modern day timeline. With all the important events, and obviously we're going back through the years now, and we're getting onto the really old stuff, some of the stuff that was giving me brain melt earlier when we was talking about where to fit in a sort of parallel to ancient Greece. And because obviously this empire that we've got is going to be like the Roman Empire parallel that from history, and we sort of got the gods, the Greeks, and then we've got wandering tribes here. So I'm trying to figure out where the best to fall, because I might need to review the Google sheet from that you sent over with those ideas on. So that will probably be well helpful actually, because I haven't got it up right now, and that might really make it clear what should fall where. Because it's really just thinking of the civilizations that existed in these old ancient ages, the age of the ancients, the age of the gods, and the age of the stars. Like, obviously, when the rise of the modern man comes, we start to get the empire, the monarchy, the government, the modern people. But now we're like, it's the ancient civilizations that are definitely a bit more mysterious. Just because there's little difference on the sheet. The people were not quite the same thing back then, since we were shooting for a more magical. Yeah, so it's probably, as for any wandering tribes, like very early humanity and very early people, it's probably best to Age of Stars. Would you say that some form of humanity could have existed then, or is it still better to put it in the rise of modern men period? Because I think that was what was giving me the brain melt, not knowing whether it was best to insert them into this area here after the Age of Stars, or along with the Age of Stars and the Age of Gods. And I get, yeah, definitely the Age of Ancients is somewhat like humanity itself wouldn't have even really been what we know of today. I like having something more magical and like mysterious exist back then, rather than have like humans exist throughout all of time. So yeah, I think that's fine to modern men people is when biological humans and people of today's words start to come about. So yeah, I think that was like what was confusing me. Well, it was that modern men, because I was like, does that mean biologically humans, or does it mean civilized? Because I think like when I was thinking modern men, I was like, oh, they mean like civilized humans who can build and can who have higher technology. But we really, like these wandering tribes and ancient Greeks, you feel that they could be here after the Age of Stars, before the moon changes its orbit. So if that's the case, I mean, correct me if I'm going down the wrong track here, but if that's the case, modern men are the wandering tribes, right? Modern men aren't the Romans or the Empire parallel. They'd be like really early peoples. Because that's what I was getting confused at, the definition of modern men, like whether modern men was like government, empire types of people, monarchy, or actual like very early peoples. The previous in the Age of Stars probably could have the longest lived, most magical elves, like Fale elves, the more magically inclined. Yeah, so that's what was mysterious. Like the people of these eras are definitely what was the question mark, because someone obviously lived, and I know that as well from the sheet, but they're definitely not the humans. They're not like your typical humans, and I like the idea of having something magical. So we could think about that a bit closer, like who those peoples were. Even get some visuals, like a mood board of like what they could have looked like as well. I think that could help and go a long way for us all to get a sort of idea in mind of what these kind of people were like. And obviously we've got here that the Lightfall tree was planted then, and I like that because it makes that was born and came to be in a more magical era as well. So we'll say here the rise of men, wandering tribes and clans form. And I think what we need to do is have the a lot of time passes thing, because it can be deceiving and give the impression that the age of humans all went by very fast. but we've got I mean, we don't need it for these bits because we've already added the years, so we already know. But where we've got the question marks, it's like we haven't set in stone the years here. So we can set in stone the years now. I mean, as for ancient Greeks, I mean, we don't literally have to have ancient Greeks in our world, but I'm wondering if there's a parallel that we could have, like people that were similar that lived back then. So obviously we wouldn't have a name for that culture in our world yet because we haven't thought that deep or that far. But also we gotta delete that bit. There we go, the empire forms. Yeah, the ancient Hebrews could have Stonehenge sort of thing. Yeah, and your timeline doesn't have ages before the ancient. Yeah, I think this is literally the start of time, so it actually might help to say the start of time. So we know that that is literally the beginning. Or the beginning, we can call it. The creation of the world. The world's creation. I think that was like literally that's probably the best place to put it, right? Was there wasn't much time that passed between then and that. And I was thinking maybe the new ancients, the gods maybe saw themselves as the ancients, what humans are to the gods. Yeah, hang on, let me get my head around that because it's brain boggling in my mind. But I think you're right, Matt. The 2 ages before, then are the age of creation, beginning of time. Yeah. So yeah, I think putting beginning world creation just before the age of ancients is probably cool. We just don't know the years or how many years have passed yet, but that we'll figure out. The age of magic. Ancients emerged from raw element. The time before that wouldn't really be history. I need to get my... I'll probably be reading through the VOD later, folks, so I can take things in properly that's being said. But we'll definitely probably do mood boards for some of the older stuff as well, so we can get some visuals in mind. Because it's a lot of... it'll be cool. Because we'll probably have historical books and texts around the world as well. So it's good to consider those things. Well, Met's idea, but very much like I wrote on the sheet, yeah. So I think you're right, but because I've got a brain melt, I need to read it out. Okay. One sec. Yeah, so the ancient Greeks like influenced the Romans a lot, so I think it's a good idea to have another civilization here, because who on earth would they have got inspired by, right? So, time period. We'll be a little bit more vague about this one. We could just say 2,000 years ago. Or maybe have it as that if you want. I mean, we can always start making it longer now with the Wandering Tribes, but then do we want the tree to be super old? I mean, it doesn't matter if it's a bazillion years old, does it? I know we said that the oldest tree on planet Earth is 5,000 years, so that's why I'm not extending the timeline too much, but in all honesty, we can have ours be 50,000 years old if we want. I think it's a special tree. Well, if you go with history, Wandering Tribes eventually settle in good ground places and create villages, so towns that would come about. So civilization is probably the settled tribes. Yeah, so I suppose like you know, a sort of more advanced civilization would come to be like shortly after the tribes, like a few centuries after, and then something that parallels the Roman Empire. I think it's good to have a close parallel to Earth, because civilizations realistically make sense to work like that. Even if we don't really flesh them out much or ever talk about them and just keep them mysterious. But it's nice to just get an idea of the timeline, at least, like years, how many years ago the tree was planted on, at least get up to there today. So the Age of Stars ends do you think that many years is too little? What do you reckon? I need to watch that documentary I watched a while ago. It went through all the civilizations of time. It was super fascinating. But then I'll get more idea about the length of history between them all, because that's what I'm trying to remember at the moment. Well, cavemen existed 10,000 years BC. And that was like the latest time. So we could potentially like really extend this even more if we want to be realistic. But it all depends. If we want to make ours closer and less apart, we can. When was the Great Migration? It was 1916, says here. So that's definitely more recent than what we're doing here. So when we go into very old history, I start what we're doing. Right, I'm going to be very, very rough about this now and just get some years in, as time is ticking. But of course, if anyone thinks, actually no, I make that a bit long, about that a bit short, feel free to just pipe up. Because Van met you both. Super helpful. Anyone else in chat as well? What was it actually called? I've got, man, I don't know. You know, I've got brave out right now, and you're asking me all these questions. I can't even answer the most simple right now. I think you said, didn't you, Van, that about 2,000 years of the age of stars? If so, maybe we should have it be that. Thanks, game. Thank you so much for that, Braid. I appreciate that. How was your stream? Appreciate you bringing your community over. How was the science and technology going? Were you doing a bit of game dev? Tell us what you was up to. So yeah, if we have it like that, that's a 2,000 year time period. Something like that. In fact, I'll stretch that out a bit, have the civilization form then. Thank you for the chat. My stream was great, making a retro pixel MMO. Thank you for asking. You're welcome. That sounds really fun. You feel free to tell us more about it if you'd like. As for us in this stream, we're being very nerdy and we're doing a world building timeline today of the entire history of time, from the present day to when the world begun. It's very, very, very brain melting stream, that's for sure, because there's a lot to consider. But it's fun. Super cool to think about these things and get an actual timeline in mind with how many years ago it was. That's fun. And then we've got our calendar here. So this calendar we got here is the modern calendar, and we're going to put tons of modern present day celebrated events on here at some point. I do want to consider that, folks, because we have neglected that a bit. We have all our festivals here in the poll channel, folks. So if anyone hasn't voted yet, feel free to. We might revisit that at some point. I'm trying to decide now whether it's better to focus on the more historical period in time or the present day calendar, because we're kind of doing a bit of both right now. Because if we decide to focus on festivals and fill in our calendar, then that's definitely the modern stuff of today in the game that's going to be happening. But if we focus on the old stuff, then we're sort of focusing more on the pantheon and gods and all the old history. So, I mean, if anyone has any thoughts on what you think could be more effective to focus on first out of the two, feel free to say, because I'm up for doing either. We can always revisit the festivals after we've done the gods if we want. It might help inspire the festivals further and give the festivals each a bit more backstory if we do it that way. But it's cool that we've thought of some. And that's cool. Love Worldbuilding. Yeah, it's super fun. It's super good. Our game, because I'm making a 2D RPG. It's going to be very lore driven, that's for sure. And some of this is going to be so ancient that it's hardly on the surface wood. Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? Stuff like, where are we on that one? That's the holiday and festival idea. So like this age in particular, like what we're doing here, we might like not really focus on it too much, at least definitely not at this point in time. If we are going to talk about old history, it will be purely so we'd be able to shape the pantheon and some of the really old, the gods of today that people worship. It would be for the purpose of that we'd want to go back into that time period and era to explore what they were like. Yes. Okay, so this one, Age of God, we probably stream for a little bit longer, but I might have to rush off today because we are ordering a pizza. We've got to love delivery pizza, that's for sure. But I'm going to try and at least get all the dates filled in before we could say goodbye for today. And how many hours do you spend on your game, Devon Crafting Potato? Oh, I work at like 4 times the amount that a person doing a full-time job would. Yeah, it's a difficult one, because I'll definitely say that my entire life is dedicated to what I do. It's kind of one of those situations where if you want to see your project to completion within a lifetime, you kind of have to work on it regularly, otherwise it would never ever progress. But sometimes, despite working on it all the time, it's still at an extreme slow progression. But it's no rush for me. I don't see it as a race, in all honesty, because this is my lifetime project. Yeah, I love pizza. Indeed, pizza is good. But I stream twice a week now. Used to stream 4 times a week and then 3 times a week, but I reduced my streaming time because I need to start putting more time into behind the scenes dev work, because it's more use for my time, I think. But the stream times are definitely really cool to do, really helpful. The whole community side of it can really help the game. Well, I'd assume that the Age of God would end when the Age of Stars begins. And in fact, we should have that as 6,000 years ago, so that as the Age of Stars ends, the rise of man, it would start the rise of man. That makes a little bit more sense. And maybe this was a 2,000 year period too. What do you reckon, folks? Van. If we're going to keep with like a 2,000 year period per age, I mean, this one might be way longer with it being the first era. I don't know. That makes it interesting if we have, say, the Lakefall tree planted to exactly 10,000 years ago. That's a really epic tree then, isn't it? I have to say. A 10,000 year tree, it's a nice number as well. Sounds better than 7,000 years ago to say 10,000 years. Pretty much, yeah. Followed you the last time I was here. Love your creativity. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'll have to have a peek on your project as well when I get a moment. But yeah, I'm super passionate and dedicated. Like, if I wasn't doing this, I feel like I wouldn't have anything else that I'd want to do. So I think it's really cool to have a passion project for anybody, whatever your passion is, that's for sure. And it would make sense that peering further into past world would happen as we went further into the quest, with the hero tracing things backwards and revealing things that change how they understand what they already know. Yeah, and pretty much sounds alright to me, but could easily be longer. Yeah, we could always stretch it so that we say 12,000 years it begins, and that makes it a 4,000 year timeline. And then the tree was nicely planted in the middle of the era, rather than right at the start. And that means ancient age of 8 then. And we could, it's like a thing then, if it's 2,000 years, 4,000 years, we could make this 8,000 years even. Or, you know, we could always just have it as question mark, so that we don't know when the beginning of time was if we wanted. But if we did want to have it as length of time, 8,000 years for this era, 4,000 for that era, 2,000 for that era. It's like a nice progressive, like slowly less and less time for each era. But this means this is the longest era if that's the case. Well, yeah, we could still split those up if we wanted. Oh wow, I'm making a mess. Enjoy your pizza. Yeah, I will be. I'll love to eat my pizza. It's going to be soon, I think. Thank you. And thanks again for the raid. And good luck with your meeting. And things back then are new, really magical, so beyond the current people's conception. Yeah. So, it's mysterious even to me and maybe you, chat. We're all like finding this one mysterious. But if we did want to talk about it for a stream, we could, but it's not 100% necessary at this point. I think it could be more vital to focus more on the present day or the age of the stars, like the age of when the Pantheon was formed, perhaps at the most in terms of history at this point. But it is still intriguing, and I think eventually it would be useful to fill in the gaps and have a bit more detail and imagery, and for times like that as well. And Soxy, thank you so much for the follow. I appreciate that. Welcome to the stream. Age of Magic should just be after creation. Age of Speech is the beginning of magic. Yes, so we can have more ages as well if that's the case. And I'd be for extending the timeline so the world is older than 20k years, that's for sure. So if that's the case, I'm just doubling it each time. If there's an 8,000 gap there, that makes that a 16,000. 16,000, 8,000, 4,000 years, 2,000 years. And this one don't even count because it's all just the modern era. We could always call that an era in itself and give that its name, the Rise of Men era. And then this one here, like you say, the era of the hero, the new, like the real modern day, could even be called the age of the hero. That makes them sound epic. So, and oops, it's called Ancients. Let's call it magic. Things get a little short as we go forward. It does until we get to this period, and then we got like, whoa, 6,000 year era, which is why I was thinking, yeah, maybe we should split that up a bit. Like at least the rise of men with the tribes and these older civilizations here before our current time period. Ancient, yeah, we did it. Yeah, so I think that's fine. Maybe we should leave that at the beginning as question mark for now, just so there's a bit of mystery of how old the world actually is, because it might have actually took a bit of time for the magic to form and to sort of the world to start kicking off like it did for us. I think we were like literally sitting for bazillions, not that long, but it was a very long time until life began, like life in the sea started and stuff. Okay, so where are we? Right, so I think I want to make this a little bit tighter and maybe make headings for the ages rather than a lot of time passes. For sure, I'll probably reorganise this file just so it's a bit neater, but at least we've got the dates in. And I don't think there's anything like extra that we've decided today. All we've put in is what we already know, and key events that already were, that we knew were going to be in the game, but this will probably fill out over time as we think of important people and really start to see things, which we already did here. The Lightfall tree was planted here. I think that's the only thing that we've added that's extra. The Lightfall tree was planted, because it was a bit of a mystery before when that happened, but now we've set in stone that it happened 10,000 years ago. Maybe the Age of Kings. That could work. What do you reckon, folks? I think that could be a good way to word it. So, I mean, if we want to count from the monarchy, then it would have been a very recent progression. I mean, I do like the idea of calling it the age of the hero if we want to start from this point. So it makes us as the protagonists feel like mucky. But we could call it the Age of Men as well, if we want to count it from here, which kind of would fit because we need a new civilization name, a new age at this point, because the Age of Stars has just ended. So it feels like there's a name that we need, an age name that we need to get set on for this. And I don't know if we had one, did we? After the Rise of Men, there'll be Age of Government, Age of the Fading Stars. Yeah, so Age of the Government's similar to Age of the King, I guess. I guess they're both the same. We'll say the Age of Men begins. Just because I'm drawing a blank for what this nameless civilization for the wandering tribes is, because there's so many years between the end of the Age of Stars and when the government formed. Like, the government formed just over 200 years ago. The Age of Stars ended 6,000 years ago. So I'm just thinking, yeah, maybe have an era for this bit. We don't even have to really fill that history out too much, in all honesty. With the tribes, it's not really important to the story, at least at this point. But I like that we've got it there, because it makes the progression of civilization a bit more realistic, rather than it just being End of Stars and then suddenly the government are there. So maybe Age of Men, and then maybe either the Age of Kings or the government age, or the Age of the Hero. But then if we had the Age of the Hero, it would be a very short era. The government one would. An Age of Government, also Rise of Government, Discovery of X, Creating Bank and such in it. Yeah, so technically the Age of Men hasn't ended. I mean, you could even call it the Age of Early Men, like very early men, because the wandering tribes, the early civilizations and the empire could probably be considered early men. The Age of Early Men ends. If someone comes up with a better word than early men, I'm all for it, but something that basically sums up empire, wandering tribes, ancient Greece, and any sort of like very early civilizations before medieval times, basically, and before kings and before governments. And the Age of Fading Stars, when people see stars are not changing and are fading out little by little. Yeah, so that would technically be year zero, right? So, I mean, we still need to think of how it ends, the abbreviation of the year, because after death obviously is what we got here in BC. We could always have it, the abbreviation BFS for fading stars, or another something else it's up to us. There's probably a number of versions of 2 words we could have for that, but that could be one. That's one idea, fading stars. We could even just have after death, like, but I don't know whether that's specific enough to our world to just go for after death, because technically they've not died just yet, the stars. They've just stopped changing, and so maybe we won't have AD. We'll need our own abbreviation. So I'm going to just put in brackets FS, meaning fading. But we'll go with whatever's the best ring to it and fits best. But that's a starting point at least. Because I mean, we could have way more eras, as you say, like we're getting less and less. If we have early men here, then we have Age of Kings, then we have fading stars, then we have Age of Era. That's fine to do, even if there's only 100 years in each of those eras. I'll have to break it down and make this document a bit tidier, I think. But cool. So I think we've done okay. We've had a chat. We've got set on exactly how many years have gone by, which is good, because it's nice to be able to have a number and have an idea of how much time exactly has passed. And it's going to just make it easier then to think of, to plan history and its span and its length, and which important people existed, and the ancestors and generations and stuff. So if anyone has any thoughts on what era is the best to start with, I mean, some of them we probably might not even touch or look into for this point in time, like the development of episode 1, Roots and Rumours. We might not even look into Age of Ancients or magic. We might just decide to solely focus on what's relevant to now. But feel free to give your thoughts on if anyone thinks it could be interesting to explore a certain one, because who knows, maybe you guys have got something in mind that I haven't even thought of, that might really be beneficial to think of. But it was interesting what Zexy pointed out earlier, that it could be interesting to link some themes in as well, to the pantheon and the history. And we already know what episode 1's theme's going to be. Okay, so yeah, I'm glad that we finished there and we successfully did this. And as for the calendar, it's still empty at the moment, but at some point we will start filling that in. Maybe next week, but maybe we'll focus on the gods next week. I'm up for suggestions on what could be a next good step for us, but I'll have a think about it over the weekend as well. I'll do a bit of my own research and think about what we could talk about next as well. And that age also has exploration of the problems that are arising with the hero. I was ready to take on these problems or not. Yeah, so we could call it that. I think it's cool to call it something that feels very relevant to the plot and the overarching plot as well. Even though kings and government definitely feel like the ones that make sense to call it, maybe one would call it something that's got more weight and more linked to what is going on. But yes, okay, awesome folks. I'm gonna head straight off today. I mean, do we have time? I mean, I don't think my pizza's here quite yet, so we might have time to drop us off at another stream. Should we do a trivia, because it's been a while? Thanks for hanging out though. This timeline was fun to do, I have to say. Even though we've not really added a ton of new events to it, we've got put down anything that is important that you know. And we did get clear as well when the war happened and when humans conquered Lakefall, which was useful too today. Because it was always a bit of a mystery when the war we sort of knew it was 16 years previous, but we didn't really know when the conquering happened, so I'm glad we've cleared that up as well. Still a lot of progress, yeah. I'm just glad we've got dates, that we've literally got numbers and year numbers and how many years ago things were now, because until you've done that, everything just it's hard. It's just a lot harder to sort of to imagine it all, and definitely harder to plan a history. Dates are good, yeah. I'm happy with them for sure. It was definitely a little bit I was a little bit uncertain especially when getting to some of the very old ages, because it can be more difficult to set a time on them. But I think it definitely works to have like a few thousand years for each of these, and progressively getting less as the generations get newer. The eras get newer. And I think it all makes sense what we've got here. And I like that the Lakefall tree was planted 10,000 years ago. I think that's a nice, memorable number. And that could be something that NPCs say in dialogue as well, that the tree is 10,000 years old. Awesome. So let's put some trivia in chat. And hi Harold, I can't remember if I said hi to you. If not, how dare I? Sometimes I get so caught up in the world building and I'm in focus mode, I might miss the odd thing. But I will be looking through the VOD again, because I know a few of you said some really interesting stuff that my brain couldn't take in properly. And I'll be looking through it and reading it properly when I get some time, because it might bring up some interesting topics of discussion. Trivia, so what was it? What is Rosie's class vampire? I still need to change the name to Violet, oh my goodness. So you got it, Value 1. So points. It's been so long since we've done trivia that I forgot how many. Yeah, there we go, we've done it. Awesome. Okay, folks. One day it'll be updated. Woo, yeah. Alright, so I'm gonna go see who's on. I think I'm gonna have time to do a raid, maybe. An old friend that I haven't spoken to in a while is playing Assassin's Creed, so I might head over to their stream, because I've never raided them ever before. And there's one of the first friends I met on Twitch, so we'll head over to her. I've not played this Assassin's Creed game myself, but it looks pretty. Her name is Heather. So I will see you next week, everyone, and more world building fun then. Take care, everyone. Bye bye. Have an awesome weekend.